and for those who weren't able to make it today, if anyone doesn't want to be recorded, either pop your video off or choose not to be here, but we're going to record it and hopefully that's okay with everyone. You can indicate as normal. Can I just check that you can see my screen? Can someone give me a shout of a yes or no?
Yeah. Yes.
Lovely.
Yeah.
So just to give you a sense to start with, the Together Active Future project is based in Pennine, Lancashire, and this gives you a sense of where we are in the UK. We've got some guests with us today from Europe and elsewhere. And Together Active Future covers these 6 local authority areas, so 6 council areas or 6 kind of communities, I suppose, within the northwest of England. And we've shared and connected some of our work with other places across the UK as well. Broadly, we've been doing change work for the last few years, focused around helping people to be active, but really thinking about how do we change the system so that it's easier for everyone to be active in our place. And we've developed this model for change where you can see in the middle that we've come to understand that it's the behaviours, mindsets, approaches, skills and capabilities of, if you like, professionals who work within the system for local authorities, for the NHS, within social enterprises, within leisure and others. It's the things that we do within our work that's going to make the biggest difference to the capability, I suppose, or the opportunity for people to be active. And it's how we then apply those mindsets and approaches, skills and capabilities, both within our places, within the places and spaces that people can move, and within the systems where systems and lives meet, where people's day-to-day lives interact with us as colleagues in councils or the health service or others. And so one of the things that we've really focused on and discovered is that it's these behaviours together, really, the collaborative effort, the ways in which we work in a connected way that's making the biggest difference. And so that leads us to this idea of building effective networks so that within our organisations, but then more broadly, within our places and communities, we can work collaboratively with others to change the way things work. So why do we need to build effective networks? Touched on a couple of things then. So we're going to think about the why. We're going to think about what does it look like, and then we're going to think about, how do I do that? So first of all, we've done some thinking about, why these places why these networks important within our organisations and within our place. And I'm glad we've got colleagues here from an organisation that we've worked with Together Active Future called Innovisor, who do lots of research around organisational networks and place ecosystems. And some of the learning that we're going to share today is from the work that we've been doing with them and some of their research, and then some of our own learning as well. So from an individual perspective, networks and connections help us to feel a sense of belonging. They can give us this sense of reassurance. We can find help and support. There's a space for us to ask questions and get advice, and broadly, networks help us, our relationships and connections with others help us to make sense of things. One of the things the research has been showing is that there's a good proportion of people within our organisations who feel a sense of loneliness, a lack of social connection, and that's been compounded, if you like, by the COVID pandemic. And so there's lots of people who are feeling not networked and not connected within our organisations and places at a professional level. When you think about small groups or teams, the importance of being, or the benefits of being connected is increased engagement and morale and motivation, the space for us to learn together, to challenge each other, to give feedback and to share the workload. And then when we think kind of in a bigger sense of our wider networks, they create the opportunity for us to share resources, to generate understanding through research, to support communities in a collaborative way, to really harness stories and the power of stories, and to build social movements and to build a sense of progress together within our places. And they create a sense of safety and assurance when we feel like we're in it together with others, and that helps us to build momentum. So what do networks look like? So in very simple terms, a bit of theory, I suppose, around different types of networks. There's many different types of networks, but here's three that we talk about often. And I think within the public sector, we often find ourselves working in quite centralized networks. And often this is kind of how we've built our structures, if you like, within local places. So you can imagine in a place where we have, say, a local authority, a council, for example, who have a range of contracts with different suppliers and organisations that they work with in partnerships. And that creates a centralised network where lots of the power and control, or certainly old power, sits with the organisation or the person who's in the middle. Opportunity for organisations really to collaborate and connect on the outside, because they're in this transactional relationship with a partner, and there's not really the spaces or opportunities for them to connect and work together. Slightly different but similar style is to have a decentralized network. And you can imagine this at an organizational level, that you've got a range of different teams within an organization who connect to each other, but are then slightly siloed and separate from their different teams or organizations within the whole. So if you think about a place network and in the type of work that we're doing in Together Active Future, you can imagine that we've got some NHS structures, we've got some council structures, we might have some sport and leisure networks where there's groups of organisations working together. But what we've found when it comes to really building change and resilient and sustainable change in the way in which things work, both organisationally and then in ecosystems, is the closer you can get to a distributed network, the more resilient it is, and the more collaborative progress you can make. And the real difference here, or the main features of a distributed network, is that there isn't that central sort of power holding organization or individual, but that everyone is connected to each other in a variety of different ways. And you could see here, you can imagine if one organization or person left or changed or was different, that the structure of the network would remain resilient. And it's really important within our place work, particularly in the public sector and third sector, as we're trying to influence the ways in which our communities look and feel when we think about tackling health and well-being issues like physical inactivity or obesity or others, that the more we can build distributed networks where organisations are working collaboratively in the right moments and places, that can make a real difference, both in terms of long-term sustainability, but also in the collaborative effort. And so today we're talking about trying to build distributed networks. And in the system change theory, there's a chap called Myron Rogers who has Myron's maxims, which have become really foundational principles of leading change within ecosystems or places. And one of those maxims is to connect the system to more of itself, or in other words, to start to build these distributed networks. So this is a graphic from a company called Innovisor I mentioned before that we've worked with. And it's important to understand that organisational structures, both within a single organisation or within, say, a local place, don't represent the way in which the network works. So you can see here this black square representing the CEO of this organisation. But when you think about how everyone's actually connected, the CEO might have very limited influence or connection to others and have no connection at all to this group over here or this individual here. And this person here in this example, feeling lonely, disconnected, disengaged, probably not being particularly effective at work potentially or productive because of that lack of connection to the whole. And so it's really important not to make assumptions about the way in which our networks and organisations work, and that information does flow in this. The information does flow, in these organisational lines. That's not how it works. You've got people who are disconnected, as I mentioned there. You've got individuals who are connecting a whole silo together. You've got a chief executive who has limited connections, and with limited connection, limited real influence over the way people feel and the way people act and the way people behave in their organization. One of the things that's come from some of the research around organizations and networks is this principle of the 3%, that 3% of the people within the network have the ability to influence 90% of the people within the network. And this is what Innovisor call their 3% rule. And we found this in some of our work to be similar. What's interesting is that as the senior leaders within an organization very rarely know who this 3% is. Who are these people who are holding the influence? And it's because, broadly speaking, within networks, as a general rule, the people who are influencing the way in which people, the others see the world and feel about the world, tend to not be the ones who are loud and the big storytellers and the ones stood at the front of meetings and speaking first. This principle particularly applies when it comes to change projects, but within organizations or within places. And I think many of us on the call today are in the business of trying to change the way things are for our communities and for the people who are suffering at the wrong end of inequalities, the wrong end of poverty, the wrong end of challenges, and an unfairness in our society that we're trying to resolve. And so when you think about who are these influencers within our networks, they're typically introverts. They're typically people who are quiet, who listen first, who seek to understand, who are kind and have high empathy. Because people like to talk to them. They're the people that we go to make sense of the world. They're the people that we go to get energy, because we find those conversations energizing and engaging, and they listen first and then make sense of things and give advice later. And so if you think about an example, for example, an organization that's going through a significant restructuring, then the management team or the chief executive might announce said restructuring plan as something really useful, and it's going to help our organization to transform. But then, of course, we all go away, don't we? And we start to have conversations at lunchtime and in our offices and in our teams. And it's this 3% of people who are influencing how the whole organization then feels about the change that's been proposed. And if the 3% are not bought into the change and they don't like it, and they're saying things like, "Oh, I'm not sure, I don't quite think that makes sense to me," then broadly that becomes the feel of the 90% of the organization as well. So it's really important to think about, when we're thinking about building networks, who are those people who hold influence? And so how do you find them? Broadly, it's not more or less complicated. And of course, there's lots of science to it to do it at scale. But if you want to start to think about in your team or your organization, who are those that have the influence within our network? You can ask people within that network. It's a peer-to-peer finding. It's asking the people within the team or the space or the place these types of questions. Who do you go to for advice? Who helps you to make sense of things? Who do you regularly connect with? Who do you trust for reliable information? Who gives you energy when you talk to them? It's these types of people that you can identify, or at least you can reflect on for yourself. Who are those people in your life, in your organization, your network, that you would go to talk about these types of things, or you would regularly connect to? And the likelihood is that's the same for others. It's those same people who are providing that safe space and that thoughtful space to influence the way in which we think and feel about things. So it's really important to understand your network. And so I'm going to challenge us now to do something a bit interactive and show you a very simple method that can help us to think about networks. But before that, we've got our poll working. Well done to Beth. So we'd love to know why you're here. So we'll take a short pause there. Hopefully a poll's popped up on your screen. We'd love to know why you are here. So if you could let us know why you've decided to join today's webinar. I'm sorry that this took a few minutes to get working, but was it about the topic? Was it about you'd heard the speaker today was okay-ish, that you like anything by TAF, and so you saw it as something by Together Active Future, so you joined? It was particularly this date and time that you're looking for something, or is it something else? So just take a couple of minutes for you to answer that survey, if that's okay. and we'll just give that a second. I think it feels like we've got 48 responses already, so it feels like we're nearly there. That's great. So that I think should be appearing in the chat. So if you're able to, if you've missed that, that should still pop up there. Beth, could you share the whiteboard for us, please? Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a quick go at mapping the network of everyone who's on this call as we sit here right now. So started off with a bit of an example. So there's a couple of you on the call today. I've put my name here first, and I'll tell you how we're going to do this in a minute. Hopefully you can all see the whiteboard okay. I've got a colleague who works with me on Together Active Future called Jamie, and Jamie and I have a strong connection, and so I've got a solid line here. There's another lady on the call, today called Helen, and we've worked together a lot, and so we've got a strong line. And Jamie and Helen know each other a bit, but we've done that with a dotted line. So what I want you to do, and I'll show you how to do this now. So in a second, if you right-click on one of the shapes, one of those blue boxes, and you click on the 3 dots next to it, you can select an option called duplicate, and I've just done that there. So I'm gonna add Matt Parker, who I think is on the call, there, and I'm gonna then click on at the bottom. There's an option for add a shape or line, and I'm going to do a dotted line to Matt because we've worked together a little bit, but I wouldn't say we know each other super well. I'm going to pop it there. So what I want you to do now is I want you to create a box and change the name in it and stick it somewhere in a fresh space. And then if you feel like you know me or Jamie or Matt or Helen, draw a line. But then as other names pop up onto this screen, I want you to draw a line between you and the person that you know, and it's going to get quite messy. So what I'm going to do is just zoom out slightly so we've got a bit more space. And I want you to add your name and then start to draw links or connections with people who you know that are on the call today. So you're going to duplicate one of the small boxes, add your name, and then start to draw, put yourself in a little space and then start to draw lines between you and others. By going down to the bottom of the whiteboard, there's a little icon that says add shape or line, select a line, and just draw it between you and someone you know. We've never done this before. This is a total experiment, but it seems to be going quite well so far. So thank you for participating, and then let's see if we can start to add some lines between you and the people you know. You're going for a dotted line. Got a couple of comments in the chat that the whiteboard's not sharing. Hopefully most of you can see the whiteboard. Is it still there for most of you? So we just wanted to play with this a little bit and give you a sense of how we're all connected and how interesting it is to think about the different people within a space. But really wanted to show you how easy it could be if you're in a small team or collaboratively to start to think about the way in which we're connected together. And one of the interesting things to think about is the strength of the relationship between the different people in the network, to think about, well, what is the level of connectivity that I've got with different people within my place or within my organization? And what level of connectivity have they got between each other? And some of this in some ways is self-reported, and that can be a nice place to start. Of course, you can do this in much more detailed and scientific ways, and there's organizations out there who do detailed network analysis. And so this is just a bit of a flavor of thinking about the ways in which networks exist. But it can be really important to understand the network before you start to think about what action to take. And one of the things to understand is the ways in which groups of people or individuals are connected, or their sense of connection, or sense of disconnection. So some of you have got lots of connections. There's lots of lines with Sarah Byrne. She's really well connected on here, and I don't know if those are lines that Sarah's drawn herself or that other people have connected to Sarah. Let me just zoom out a little more here. It's maybe too much now. But you can think about in your teams a nice exercise to do, and so you can use this tool. This is available on Microsoft Teams, this whiteboard function. In a bit more of a structured way, you could think about in your team of 5 or 6 people, well, how well are we connected to each other? And then for those partners who we work with, let's think about the connections that we have with those. And understanding the network that you've got, as I say, is really important. So this is fun, probably not particularly informative given the methodology that we've used, and it would take a bit more planning, but we just wanted to give you an idea of the ways in which you can think about networks and network mapping and starting to do that understanding of networks. So we're gonna pause that there as a bit of an idea of a tool that you can use and some of the things that you can start thinking about. So all right, if we stop sharing that now, Beth, is that okay?
Yeah, Ken, I was just going to say, for those that haven't seen it, I'll just see if I can briefly share the screen so they can at least see what's been created.
Yeah, great. Okay.
Yeah. Has that worked for those that can't see?
No, I think it's just showing the Teams call now rather than the whiteboard.
Sorry, we tried.
So that gives you a sense of one of the ways in which you can start to understand your network. And the other way, which we'd already touched on, was start to have conversations with those within your organization network to try to understand how people are connected and where the influence sits. So we're gonna move forward a bit more now. So how can you love this quote: to persuade the undecided, send them someone they trust. And this was a quote, I think, from Abraham Lincoln, talking about how to win elections. But we're going to think now a little bit about how do you develop, build, or influence within your network. And there's some principles that we've found in Together Active Future, some principles of network building to start with. And these are not necessarily the actions that you take, but for some things to be thoughtful about, some things to be mindful of. So first of all, it's important to understand more about the network that you're in, and we've talked a little bit about that already. Think about those with influence. Who's trusted? Who are those trusted people who can help you to build the network? And when I think about Together Active Future, we've done work with all different parts of our community. So we've done work with schools, we've done work with madrasas, which are religious education settings within the Islamic faith, often connected to mosques. We have done work with mental health teams, we've done work with housing associations in partnership with Active Lancashire and others. And one of the keys where the work has been really successful is that we've partnered with either a person or an organisation who is trusted by that cohort. So for example, at the work that we've done with schools, we linked up and connected with the school's games organiser who's been working in this area for 10+ years and is a trusted individual who's got expertise, but also relationships and connections where people trust her. And so as we worked with her, it's been easier for us to build relationships and connect, and then have influence in those connections through finding those trusted partners. And when we think about communities, for example, and communities that we're trying to support or understand, really important to find those who have influence within those communities and places who are trusted. Then a key principle, number 3, is to build habitual connecting first. And what I mean by that is this the habit of, on a regular basis, connecting together, and both on an individual and a group level. And then to scale that then with potentially more formal processes, whether it's regular network meetings or events. But it's important that there's a habit behind the connection, and that we need to be intentional. Networks don't build and develop and aren't sustained without some intentional effort. They don't happen by chance. But we can be intentional about the things that we do and the things that we work on. And the final thing is to be really clear on the purpose. Why would connection help? It can be really great to go and host a networking type event for people who are similarly minded to you or work in a similar space. And you can have a really great time, and maybe people will come to the next event and maybe the next one after that. But if we're not clear on what the purpose is, if there's not a sense of doing something together, if there's not a sense of we know why we're here and what we're trying to accomplish together, then very quickly that network connection and the closeness of that network very quickly dissipates. And so being clear on purpose is really important. So those are some principles of network building. Before I share with you some of the things we've found are useful for effective network building, we're going to go into some breakout rooms and just for you guys to have a chat and share your experiences first of what are some of the ways, some of the personal actions that you've found to be useful in establishing organizational or place-based networks. So we're going to pop you into breakout rooms of 3 or 4 or 5 of you, and we want you just to talk about some of the things, the practical things that you've done in your career, in your space, in your organization to develop connectivity, either between teams or between organizations, if you work in kind of a partnership-based model. So what are the practical things that you've done or learned that are effective in building connection? Okay. So if we can.
And is this for 5 minutes or a bit longer?
We'll take 8 minutes through to 10:40. If that's all right, we'll come back at.
Yeah.
Is that doable? So just a reminder of the question before you go. What are some of the practical things you've done or could do to build connection within your organization or across a place network? Just have a chat about that, share some ideas, some of your good practice, and then we'll share some of the things we've learned in Together Active Future with you once you come back.
It should be moving people across now.
Great. I think we're all back. Just a reminder that we're recording. Hopefully there have been some useful conversations where you've been able to share some of your ideas and experiences with each other. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen now and share with you some of the things that we've been learning about. Some of the things that we've been learning about. Things you can actually do. So can I just confirm that you can see my screen, and if you could just ask people to mute themselves as well, that'd be useful. Thank you. So here's 8 things that I think are hopefully fairly practical that you can think about and build into your work as you seek to establish and develop networks. One of the first things that we've learned, or that I've learned, is to start with our end in mind. And when I say our, I mean the collective end, the collective purpose that we might be thinking about, or perhaps even more importantly, as we start to interact with people, to focus the conversation on the thing that they're looking to accomplish, the thing that they're looking to do. So often when we arrange meetings or events or conversations, we're going with a story that we want to tell, with an agenda, with a topic we want to cover, we want to ask for some funding or some resources, we want to do a deal, whatever it might be. And that can be quite difficult for the person on the other end. And you've probably all been in a position where you've been invited to a meeting and there's almost this sense of a little bit of anxiety about what are they going to ask me for? What is this about? What is it that they want? And so it's important, I think, to start with their end in mind, or the collective thing that we might be able to work on, to find out more about them rather than coming to tell people about the thing that you're interested in. Another great thing, a key action to take in network building is to share, introduce, and invite. And great network builders try to connect people to each other rather than holding all the connections with themselves. And so, you know, in the example on the network map that I shared earlier, I've been doing some work with Helen and I've been doing some work with Jamie, but I knew that they could be really great together, and so I connected them together. And they then did work together that didn't involve me, and so that was great, and that was really useful for them. And so this idea of introducing people to each other and being generous, and that can be at events, it can be via email, it can be introducing people to each other on WhatsApp. But connecting people together, connecting the system to more of itself is a really important thing that you can do, and hopefully there's some practical examples there. The next is to compliment and express gratitude. I think, if I can be bold, I think there's something about British culture generally, not speaking about us individually, but generally, where we like to have a bit of a moan and we like to have a bit of a complain, and we sometimes can talk about other people in a way that's not particularly positive. And that damages our collective network, in the sense that if I give you an example, if someone has said to you, "Oh, there's this webinar that TAF are doing on Thursday, but Ken Masters speaking and he's really boring. He don't know what he's talking about, and is full of his own self-importance." How likely would you have been to connect to that event? Probably less so. But if someone said, "Oh, well, Beth is hosting the workshop and she's really engaging and she's thoughtful and she's been doing some brilliant work," then you're more likely to want to connect and form relationships with those people. And so as we're thinking about how to build strength of network across our places, being complimentary and expressing gratitude to those who you work with, those who you connect with, and others, even people that you might consider, you know, organizational competitors, for example, still really important to talk about their strengths, to talk about things that they're good at, and be positive in our language. The next, it's about informal connections. It's about going for a coffee. It's about getting outside of the workspace so that you can connect on a more informal level. It's about using inclusive language. When you're talking to people, it's not about mine or yours or that other organization's work. It's about us, it's it's we. And it's surprising, actually, as you just start to use those collective pronouns, that can over time start to build a sense of connectedness and inclusivity. We've touched on this point already, but I like this phrase. It's not mine, but to respect intentional consistency more than you revere intensity. In our little breakout room, I was talking about how at the beginning of TAF, we held a really big connection event that had the makings of forming some really important relationships and connections. But then for a few months, we didn't have the right mechanism to follow up with that and to continue to build on that energy. And so it dissipated. We lost those connections. People perhaps felt a bit confused about why nothing had happened since. And so smaller, more consistent, intentional effort is more useful than the big one-off shows of affection. I'm sure in our personal relationships, we'd choose very nice daily connection with a family member or a friend than we would them buying us a fancy gift once a year on Valentine's Day and then not speaking to us in between. You can imagine how, like, you know, relationships are not built like that, are they? With like one big show of connection or affection and then silence for months. So it's about little text messages. It's about remembering people's birthdays. It's about a phone call out of the blue that's for nothing other than just to say hello. But being consistent means you have to plan that. So I quite often allocate time in my diary where I'm just going to connect. I'll set aside half an hour to say, right, who can I connect with? And I'll just send them a WhatsApp message. I'll make a quick phone call with no other purpose than to say hello, to subconsciously communicate this idea of, I remembered you. You were on my mind and I wanted to connect with you. I wanted to see how you are. And in our work relationships, that's just as important as in our personal relationships. None of these things are new, because this is how you form relationships in your personal life. It's the same in our professional life. One great thing that I think you can do that's really important is to stop meeting sat around tables indoors, but to start to connect with people outside, whether that's going for a walk. You know, when was the last time in your work setting that someone said, "Hey, do you want to just come and throw a frisbee at the park for half an hour and have a chat?" Like, that's probably never happened to any of us in our work life. That would be great. And actually, the connection and conversation that you would have in that setting would be much more valuable and much more meaningful and much more authentic. And one of the things about being outside or on a walk or playing a game of tennis or whatever, throwing a frisbee, whatever it might be, is it's comfortable then to have silence. And when you sat around a table, it can be awkward if you just both sit there for 30 seconds while you think about what to say. But when you're on a walk, you can be a bit more thoughtful about the conversation that you're having, because it's okay to be quiet for a few seconds or a few minutes while you climb that stile or walk around the corner and you're enjoying the beautiful nature outside. I think the final thing that share is this idea of feelings being more important than facts, that stories, that connecting on an emotional level can be really important. And you can think about the stories that you tell, and you can improve your storytelling capability by using little stories and examples. And stories don't have to be big long stories, but I just shared one then of, you know, when you can imagine two people sat across the table from each other having a conversation, and that feeling awkward, but as opposed to being outside and walking up and crossing a stile and walking around the corner and saying, you know, that's a story. And as you talk to people in stories and share examples, that evokes feelings, and it's feelings that tie humans together, not facts, not figures. It's shared experiences and feelings. And so think about ways in which you can create feelings that connect you. And if you're not sure about your ability to build networks, then rest assured that any of us can do it. You know, ants are not very capable. Ants are fairly stupid compared to humans, if you like, individually. But collectively, ants build some of the most fantastic ecosystems in nature. And they do that by building really effective networks between each others. But their networks are built on the individual physical connections where they share feelings through hormones and through sense. But they interact purely on an individual basis. But by having lots and lots of individual connections, they can form connection at scale in huge ecosystems where they can hunt for food, they can sense danger, they can build nests and all the rest of it. And they collaborate and cooperate for the greater good. Ants don't have an ego. They don't have that individualistic, I'm trying to get what's right for me. They're all about being what's right for us. What can we do together? How do we look after each other? And they create incredible ecosystems. And I've thought about, in our places, if we could create networks with all of the capability that we've got as humans, even half as effectively as ants, then we'd be on to a winner. And so if ants can do it, so can we. So I just want to share with you one example of the work we've been doing in Pennine, Lancashire. And this was, I mentioned it earlier, the work we've done with Innovisor about our Rossendale Connected network. So Innovisor helped us to map our network. So Rossendale Connected, the very quick story. Rossendale Connected formed during COVID. On the first connection event, there was 6 of us on a Zoom call where I'd invited 4 or 5 people. I used to work in Rossendale, 4 or 5 people to say, right, don't know what this pandemic is, but can we support our community? And I'd reached out to a few people who I knew. At the next meeting we had 20. At the next meeting we had 50, and we did all kinds of things. Like many places, this was not unique. We did many things that supported communities. But what we did then was we transitioned the purpose of that network to have a broader health and wellbeing focus. We gave it a name. It's called Rossendale Connected. And over the last 3 or 4 years, that network has continued to connect on a monthly basis and through some monthly Zoom calls and 6 monthly events with a focus on health and wellbeing, with a real sense of purpose of tackling inequality, and particularly physical activity inequality in that borough. And so we asked Innovisor to map the network to help us understand it first, and this was one of the network maps. And 85 people responded to the survey, and they listed the people that they felt that they connected with regularly. And you can see here that there were 5 people who were particularly influential, that were particularly had a lot of connections, and that people connected to regularly. And if you think about the 3% rule that I shared earlier, well, there was 5 people, and the Rossendale Connected Network is about 120, 130 people, and so the maths kind of makes sense there. What's interesting was how people felt about the network. And so sometimes when you think about place-based networks, many of you will have networks in your place, and you might wonder, like, well, what's the purpose of it? How do people feel about it? Is it useful? I just wanted to flash up, these were 13 questions that assessed how people felt about the network. And if I click on, if you look at these 3 that I've highlighted in red and yellow there, I believe Rossendale Connected activities bring important benefits to the people of Rossendale. And green is agree, and yellow is neutral, and the red's a disagree. I think we're on the right path to working collaboratively to improve the health and wellbeing in Rossendale. You can see the green there, average score 4.33 out of 5. I appreciate the role of Rossendale Connected, and we talked about appreciation already, and I feel informed about the purpose of Rossendale Connected, this idea of having a clear sense of purpose. And again, you can see the greens there, and there's others. But if I think about the key features of the Rossendale Connected network, it's been consistent, it's been regular, it's had a clear sense of purpose. There was a beginning of some informal connecting, and then there was some process added. So there's scheduled monthly meetings with then every 6 months a get together. And the team in Rossendale, Phil and Jackie and the team, have done a brilliant job, and with the help of Innovisor, of understanding their network in a really detailed way and being able to utilise the network for the good of local residents in a really connected and collaborative way. And there's loads of examples that we can share, and there's a lot more detail, and we can perhaps share the detail of the Rossendale Connected work. If you go to the Together and Active Future website and look under learning, there's sharing the learning reports there that you'll be able to see. So in summary, distributed networks are effective for working in the public sector on complex social issues. It's important to understand your networks. It's important to find the influencers and align on shared purpose. The connections are going to happen one by one in all of those ways that we've talked about and that you shared in your breakout rooms as well. But it's going to take consistency and effort, and that focus on feelings through stories is a really important way to build those human connections. Hopefully that's a summary of some of the things that we've shared today. So in a second, I'll stop sharing my screen. We'd love for you to share in the chat in the last couple of minutes. What will you take away from today's session? What have you found useful? But particularly to think about, what action will you take next? And so we'd invite you to comment in the chat just to give us a sense of how this has landed. What will you take away from today's session? And what action will you take in your organisation or place? And then just while you're doing that, so exciting things coming very soon will be a chance for you to share some feedback on today's session. We've got a whole series of webinars and learning events as part of the TAF Leadership Learning series that you can find on our Eventbrite page. And coming up on the 7th of March, an event that we're really excited about, our Leadership Collaboratory, where we've got a whole day focused on systems leadership and what it takes to lead in places. So that's on the 7th of March. And you can sign up again via the Eventbrite page. So that's me and a whistle stop tour. So open for questions. So we're gonna put the link in for the feedback form. I'd love you to put in the chat, as mentioned there, what are you taking away from today? What have you learned? But if anyone, whilst we're doing that, if anyone's got any questions, happy to cover those in the few minutes that we have left. So if you've got a question, just unmute yourself and shout it out whilst you're also adding to the chat and filling in that feedback form if you would. It's a 2-minute feedback form. It's really easy. Nina.
Hi, Ken. It was so interesting about that kind of small group of people that were the most connected. I just wondered, when that sort of came about, what did you then do with that information? How did you kind of share that, you know, and what did you do in terms of, you know, really capitalising on those sort of key influencers?
Good question. And no, that's great. We've got Phil Holden on the call, and I can see his name. So Phil's led this work, particularly post that work with Innovisor and understanding it. Phil, is there anything you'd want to share in response to that? Like, what have you done with it next?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I can't put my camera on. I need a software update, but you can hear me, can't you?
Yes.
So I think part of that work is still ongoing, if I'm honest with you, and it's, you know, it is a learning curve as we're going through. You know, that we've developed the network and we're learning all these things. Then we're trying to, you know, understand what it means. So part of that is a distributed leadership. You know, there has to be somebody who kind of sends the emails out, and there has to be somebody that sends the invites out to the meetings. So that person, what we understand now, is kind of at the core of what the Innovisors were saying. Now, what we don't understand is if is it that person as an individual because of the skill set that they've got, or if that person left, and would the next person in line become the most popular, or, you know, the most connected? So these are the types of things that we're trying to understand about what distributed leadership means and how we continue on the journey that we're moving on as part of the understanding. So I don't really have an answer for you at the minute. I guess we're in that curve, and this is all part of learning and coming to these, you know, workshops to slowly understand that better. And as we move through the next few months, we'll start to figure that out and understand what it does mean.
I think just to add to that, Nina, I think some of the things that I know Phil and his team have tried to do is both be really grateful for those who are holding that network together to a degree in terms of that connectivity, but also doing things like they've introduced the idea of having rotating chairs on all their meetings. So there's a different person chairing the meeting every time, so that more people kind of are coming to the fore, you know, in those meetings, and hosting different types of connection events where people are able to shift, I suppose, from that perhaps decentralized network to more of a distributed network where there's more connections in between the various components kind of who are on the fringe of the network, and trying to really intentionally build the connections between other organizations and people within the system. Emily?
Hi everyone, I've joined a little late. Just to add to that, what happened, I was involved with some of that Innovisor work. We did a brief overview with the network. Almost what was great about the Innovisor work was we could turn it around really quickly, which is one of our learnings. If you're going to ask stuff, quickly get the results back and discuss it and make it meaningful. And then what was really key was the people at the center of it, those bigger dots that you mentioned there, Nina. By the time we even got to that quick meeting, they'd already been back to their line manager and talked about how valuable the role was and started working on securing it, so that they felt value to then have the confidence to have that conversation was really important. So it's just knowledge, right? It's just learning, and how quickly you get that back means it gets actioned.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. Hugh?
Yeah, just after maybe some tips or some advice or your thoughts around, obviously with a network, what you want is you want that to build, so there will always be new connections that come into it. How would you go about making sure that when somebody new comes into a network that's perhaps pretty well established, that they don't feel like they're so far behind and they've got like some distance to go to catch up? Obviously, because that's going to be a barrier then in terms of developing that network and the diversity of experience and knowledge and everything that goes into it.
Yeah, thanks, Hugh. A couple of quick thoughts spring to mind. That's a really good question, and something we've thought about a lot. I think having some really great short resources that kind of give people a sense of the journey and where we've been. So potentially things like pre-recorded, introductory, almost things like you do as an induction when someone joins an organization. You can almost replicate some of those things. So how do we give a sense of the history and the work that we've done so far? Is there online a few YouTube videos of members of the network talking about their experience and the things that they've learned already? And I think then some really intentional introductory work where you might you might host some small group meetings, even just for 10 or 15 minutes online, where you can introduce that new member of the network to 2 or 3 people today, and next week I'm going to introduce them to 2 or 3 more. And the more you can start to build those connections across, the more quickly people can kind of, I would say it's more about getting comfortable in the relationships than it is about getting comfortable in the knowledge, but both are important, and I think you can do those in a way that's connected, but also take those 2 points separately, give them the knowledge, but also proactively give them the connections as well. That's helpful. Natalie?
Hi, yeah, I put it in the chat, but I didn't know if you could see it. Really useful to know if there's any tools or resources that you'd recommend. Particularly interested in mapping. And the other one, just to pick up on your last point around sharing the journey. If you're familiar with Padlet, they have a really good timeline, and you can drop images, videos, snapshots, minutes, whatever in there, and you can see the journey that you've been on. It's a really visual, nice, free way to present that and to see how far you've travelled as well. But just my question about the resources or tools that you'd recommend, or websites. Thank you. Really useful.
No, thank you. And for those who need to go as well, thank you for joining us, and see a few people dropping out. So grateful that you're here if you need to head off. I think that, well, there's lots of mapping tools. One that we've used a fair bit in Together Active Future is one called Miro, which is an online platform that you can use to map networks, and we've done that a fair bit. There's a number of organizations as well who can help. There's a lot of science behind really mapping and understanding a network, and that's quite difficult to do on your own. Emily's just shared the link to Miro.com in the chat there for you. So that's the tool that we predominantly use for informal network mapping. And we've got Richard here from Innovisor, who has been our network mapping partner as part of our journey in Together Active Future. And I'm sure he'd love to work with people who are doing that. But like I say, that's a different project. So informally, we've used Miro, but there are others. Kumu is another one that I think you can use for good network mapping. Richard, I don't know if you want to come in there. Is there any tools for people who just want to do some informal network mapping? Is there anything that you'd recommend? You're probably the expert here as opposed to me, really.
Oh yeah, what kind of tools? There are many different tools you can use, like Como you mentioned, but you also have add-ons to Excel. So as long as you are very structured in gathering data, gathering relationships, almost create a log for yourself. You can turn it into a network through Excel. The plugin is called NodeXL, I think. So there are really many different tools out there that can help you.
Thank you.
But then you need to analyze it, right? And actionable. And I think that's also what's really important. You need to move away from this looks interesting to this is something you need to act on, right? So try not to excite your mind too much, but really move forward with those great insights that you can see in the networks.
Thank you, Richard. Really good point. Appreciate you sharing that. On the basis we've not got any other hands up and no other questions, just to say thank you very much to everyone who's joined us. Hopefully that's been useful. You'll be able to check back the recording, which will be on our YouTube channel, I would think, in the next few days. So thank you everyone for joining us. We appreciate you being here. And if you haven't completed the little feedback survey yet on that link in the chat that's a bit higher up, we'd appreciate that. And hope you all have a lovely rest of the day and enjoy the weekend once you get there. Thank you for being with us.